Welcome to another episode from the Air Force Judge Advocate General School. We have a remarkable interview in store for you today. This episode is the first of a two-part interview with Air Force retired Colonel Carlyle Smitty Harris, a Vietnam War veteran fighter pilot who was shot down on combat mission in his F-105 over North Vietnam on April 4th, 1965. Colonel Harris was forced to bail out, captured by the North Vietnamese, and became the 6th American POW, where he spent the next 8 years in captivity with hundreds of other American POWs, including John McCain and George Bud Day. Colonel Harris suffered through torture, solitary confinement, and relentless abuse, but endured through it all with a reliance on the Code of Military Conduct and a communication system called the TAP Code, an old and unused World War II communication method that he covertly taught his fellow POWs, and they in turn taught others, which remained a vital link of communication through their captivity, without which they may have not prevailed. Here are a few clips from part one.
We knew how important communication was and went to every effort, wherever we were moved, to make sure that all POWs knew it, and took great risks sometimes to do that. Do not give them anything of value until they torture you so much that you can take no more and still retain your sanity and will.
Welcome to the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Reporter Podcast, where we interview leaders, innovators, and influencers on the law, leadership, and best practices of the day. And now to your host from the Air Force Judge Advocate General School.
Welcome to another episode from the Air Force Judge Advocate General School at Maxwell Air Force Base. I'm your host, Major Rick Hanrahan. Remember, if you like the show, please consider subscribing on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and leaving a review. This helps us to grow and outreach to the JAG Corps and beyond. Well, we have what I would say is a truly amazing guest in store today, and an amazing show for you today. I'm personally humbled and honored to introduce our very special guest, retired Colonel Carlyle Smitty Harris, most well known as an 8-year prisoner of war, or POW, in North Vietnam, creator of the TAP Code that allowed fellow POWs to communicate while in captivity, and frankly, just a story of remarkable courage, strength, and inspiration. Sir, it is an honor to have you in today to talk to us.
Well, thank you very much. One slight correction. I really got the TAP Code. It had been used in World War II between different parts of a prison. U.S. prisoners would tap on a common water pipe that could carry the sound. And that story was told to me out at Stead Air Force Base, the SEER program out there. And as I was leaving class, it was just providence. The instructor was walking beside me, and I asked him, how did they send the dashes? And he explained if I had a moment, and he went up on the chalkboard and showed me the TAP Code. So I really didn't invent it. I just was able to happen to have it.
But clearly something that was absolutely imperative for communication with your fellow POWs. Is that correct, sir?
Yes. We were held in solitary confinement to begin with. And after about 3 months, for some reason, the North Vietnamese made decisions and then countered them. We never knew what they were going to do. They put 4 of us into a cell together, and another joined us, so there were really 5. And while we were together, that was wonderful. But I taught them the TAP Code, and a few days later, we were back in solitary confinement, and we tried it out, and it worked fine. Everyone knew how important it was for us to communicate with each other. And so we went to great lengths to make sure that every POW learned the TAP Code. And it really spread like a chain reaction because everyone knew how important it was.
Incredible, sir. I'd like to provide for our listeners just a little bit of background, and then we can kind of segue in back into this incredible story. So Colonel Smitty Harris entered the Air Force on January 2nd, 1951, and served through the rank of sergeant before earning his commission. He retired from the Air Force as a colonel in 1975. During his career, he flew fighter aircraft, was an instructor pilot, operations officer, and faculty member at the Air War College. On April 4th, 1965, while on a combat mission, his F-105 was hit, and Colonel Harris was forced to bail out over North Vietnam. He was captured immediately and was the 6th American POW and spent the next 8 years as a POW in various prisons where he was confined, mistreated, and tortured. As we've been discussing, he is credited with introducing the TAP code to the POWs so that they could communicate surreptitiously between their cells. During his career, Colonel Harris earned 2 Silver Star Medals, 3 Legion of Merits, the Distinguished Flying Cross, 2 Bronze Stars for Valor, 2 Air Medals, and 2 Purple Hearts. Colonel Harris retired from the Air Force in August of 1979 and entered directly into the University of Mississippi Law School, where he joined the Mississippi Bar in December of 1981. His post-Air Force employment included banking, law, and marketing. He otherwise keeps busy with volunteer work, flying, travel, golf, reading, and other pursuits, to include publishing this new book here at the end of 2019 with his co-author Sarah Berry, entitled TAP Code, The Epic Survival Tale of a Vietnam POW and the Secret Code That Changed Everything. He resides with his wife Louise in Tupelo, Mississippi, where his children and grandchildren also reside. So, sir, I know we were just talking about TAP Code, which is an amazing story, and I'm looking at the book here, which is also an amazing book. But maybe we could start a little bit more on your background. I know you enlisted in the Air Force actually in 1951. Could you talk a little bit about how that came to be?
Well, in 1951, the Korean War was going on, and in order not to be drafted into the Army, I enlisted in the Air Force with a goal of sometime going through pilot training and getting my commission in wings. And that actually happened in September of 1953. So from then on, I wanted to be a fighter pilot and was able to go through pilot training to get that assignment. After gunnery school, I wanted to be in the F-86F program so I could go shoot down some MiGs. But, well, I got part of my wish because I was assigned to F-86Fs in a squadron that was located at Sidi Slimane, French Morocco. It turned out to be a very good assignment anyway. They didn't have any MiGs over there, though.
So maybe briefly, sir, could you describe where your assignments were and what were some of your trainings you had to do?
Well, I came back from French Morocco into the Air Training Command and was an instructor at Greenville Air Force Base, and then transferred to Bainbridge, Georgia, which was a civilian-run, operated pilot training base. But there was a good outcome of that because I met a young lady who is sitting beside me right now, and we've been married for over 60 years, so it turned out to be a great assignment. After that, they sent me to Air Training Command headquarters at Randolph Air Force Base in San Antonio, and we were there for a couple of years. Both of our daughters were born while we were on that tour in San Antonio. They're little Texicans now, I guess. It was a very good experience, too. I was chief of the promotion and flying status branches for all of Air Training Command. And right down the hall from me were the officer assignment guys, and I made friends with them and was able to get another fighter assignment was assigned to McConnell Air Force Base. We flew F-100s before transitioning into the F-105.
Around what time frame was that, sir?
I went to McConnell Air Force Base in early 1964, and was then assigned from there after going through F-105 training out at Nellis, and we were assigned to Okinawa, and that was such a beautiful place. We loved it. It was a 2-year tour, but we could have extended. My wife and my daughters loved it as well, to a great squadron and a great squadron commander, Robbie Reisner. And we were just flying training missions in the F-105, but then they started sending about 2 flights out of 2 or 3 different squadrons to Korat Air Base in Thailand. And from Korat, we were flying missions up over Laos and into North Vietnam. And it was on one of these, it was on my second PDY to Korat, and the mission was to a large bridge that had vehicular and rail traffic, and it was the first important target we had even been permitted to hit. And so I flew a mission against it on consecutive days, the 3rd and the 4th of April. The 4th of April, I was carrying 8 750-pound bombs and happened to be the first airplane down the chute in a 45-degree dive angle. And the rest of my squadron was staying in altitude because they wanted to see the impact of my bombs, because the wind was unknown. Down where the bridge was, it was in kind of a valley, and the winds were not very predictable. I made a perfect run, perfect sight picture. The bombs came off, and I pulled out, pulling a lot of G's, and hit my afterburner to get out of there in a hurry. And some lucky gunner shot a 37 millimeter exploding anti-aircraft round up in the air, and I took it out.
Could you walk us through that experience, sir, about what happened next?
The exploding round hit in the engine area. The F-105 was single pilot and single engine airplane, and immediately deceleration because I was getting no engine power. Also, a bunch of fire lights were on the warning panel were lit, and I tried to turn the aircraft towards the sea because I knew there was a better chance of rescue there, but I didn't get very far. The plane was becoming uncontrollable. I think some of the hydraulic lines had been cut. At any rate, I was forced to eject, and everything went perfectly in the ejection. The chute opened automatically, and I was at fairly low altitude, 1,500 feet or so, I guess. And I looked down to see if there was any place I could guide the chute to seek cover of some kind, or a river, or any hills. But to my dismay, I was directly over a large Vietnamese village with rice paddies in every direction. We were so close to the target, the bridge, that the villagers could hear their own anti-aircraft guns going off, and also the bombs from ensuing airplanes hitting the target. So if they weren't hiding, they were looking up to the sky to see what was going on, and they immediately saw my chute, and I was just overpowered. Immediately, they were waiting for me on the ground.
If I can ask, what was going through your mind at this moment?
Well, I remember thinking, I'm going to be in North Vietnam for a long time. By a long time, I meant 6 months or more. It turned out to be almost 8 years. But they were very angry when I landed. One of the young men was really emotional, and he was influencing some of the other villagers. 3 of them had rifles. He pushed me up against a brick wall of a broken down building at the edge of the village, and 3 of his cohorts were just 15 feet away or so with their rifles, and he walked over and put his finger on my forehead as an aim point. But there was a lot of talk, and villagers, some older villagers, milled in between us, and of course my life was saved. But I found out that generally the North Vietnamese people were very well disciplined, and they had been told to capture American pilots alive because we might be of some value as hostages or whatever.
And then from that point, maybe you could walk us through the first 72 hours of that experience, from what you recall, the conditions, where they took you, kind of what you experienced.
From the village, I had bunged up my knee pretty badly on landing. I also had a broken shoulder, but they gave me back my boots. They had stripped me down in my shorts before, and they gave me back my boots and flying suit, and I zipped it halfway down as a sling for my arm, and we started walking, and I guess we walked at least 3 hours. They had one stop for lunch where they had some lunch, and I had 2 guards watching me, and I indicated I was very, very thirsty, and they finally gave me a bowl of hot, watery soup that I could barely get down, but it was a little bit of liquid. Finally got to I guess it was kind of a police station. Well, I went through a couple other villages and was put in it was obviously a cell, heavy wooden door, and 1 bed, which was nothing but heavy wooden planks. They pushed me in, and in a short time, a cadre of about 3 or 4 of them came back, and one of them was an English speaker. And he immediately asked me what ship I had flown from and what were my targets and capabilities of the airplane. And I refused to answer anything except I did give them my name, rank, service number, and date of birth. They got pretty darn angry and knocked me around quite a bit. They saw that I had a wedding band on, so they threw me down, and they asked me to give it to them, and I wouldn't. So they threw me down and took it off me. It wasn't very difficult because that was my arm with a broken shoulder too. So, but anyway, later, maybe after they left, I heard a bunch of voices outside the cell, and they had encouraged villagers to come and see this criminal pirate that they had captured. So I felt more safe inside the cell than out. But the door opened, and they had a roped-off area to keep the villagers away from me because they had been brought with a loudspeaker to an emotional state that's unbelievable. And these are the same villagers I had walked through their village earlier in the day, and they just looked at me curiously. They showed me their hatred with their fists and so on, and I was finally thrown back in that cell, and I was glad to be there.
Could you describe the conditions within the cell?
Well, there was a bucket and nothing else in the bed, and it was about 7 by 7 maybe, and a barred door with a about 10 by 10 hole in it that could be opened from the outside that had bars in it so that they could look in, and there was one light that hung down that was on 24 hours a day, as that happened in all of the cells in which we were held. They could always look in on us, and they always had the light on. From there, I was put in a Jeep-like vehicle and taken to the city of Thanh Hoa, which was a pretty good-sized North Vietnamese city, really, and not far from the bridge I had bombed. And the Jeep pulled up, and I was pulled out, and my blindfold taken off. My hands were tied in front of me with ropes, and there were several thousand North Vietnamese there to greet me. They were being kept away from me, but they had big old lights illuminating a stage of some kind, outdoor stage, and these blaring microphones bringing the people to a state of hatred and emotion. And from there, I was tied to a guy who was in a motorcycle sidecar. He gave me about 3 feet of rope, and we started through the crowd with probably 8 or 10 guards, 4 or 5 on each side, trying to keep the people away from me because they were ready to do me in. And they showed it by throwing things at me, shoes, anything they had. One young man was able to get through the guards and give me a kick to the kidney area that was almost incapacitating. But I stumbled on, and that went on for probably a half an hour. And we came to another Jeep-like vehicle, and I was put on it, or in it, with 2 guards up front and 1 back with me, blindfolded. And we started the trek overnight in the Jeep and arrived in Hanoi, their capital, sometime midday the next day. And from there I was thrown in another similar cell, except it was a large prison with many cells in it.
At this new location, were you able to see other POWs at that time, or did you know whether you were alone or you were with others?
No, I did not see other POWs at that time. They went to insane efforts to keep us from seeing or communicating with other POWs, and we were, the 6 of us, when I got there, were all in solitary confinement. I was able to use voice and during their siesta time call down to another American who was whistling a song that I recalled, so I knew he was an American. And we just had a few words. His name was Hayden Lockhart. He had been shot down. He was the 3rd person shot down over North Vietnam. I was the 6th. But just exchanging names were really all we could do because the guards came and banged on the door, and finally a turnkey opened it, and an English speaker came in and told us what was going to happen if we were caught communicating again. So we tried it a couple times more during siesta time, but it was very short, and we didn't have a lot of communication. That's when we were moved back to another area of the Wallow prison, the Hanoi Hilton as we called it, into a little section that had 4 cells on each side of a little corridor. And all of them were about the same, roughly 7 by 7, and they each had 2 bunks in them and leg restraints at the end of each that could be moved over on top of the ankles and locked. It was pretty rough in there because we couldn't talk to each other and get away with it. We did a little bit, but the guards were really adamant about any communication. But after about 3 months, 4 of us were taken out and put in a cell together, a larger cell. And then Hayden Lockhart, a day later, joined us, so there were 5 of us. And at that time, I was able to teach them the tap code. It had not been taught in any of our services. So that's how it started. The North Vietnamese did irrational things all the time. Maybe 10 days or so we were back in solitary confinement in the same area. We called it Heartbreak Hotel, those 8 cells. And there were some other later shoot downs that came in. And as they did, we were able to get voice communication a little bit and teach them the tap code. And all of us used it on the walls. And that's how it really started. We knew how important communication was and went to every effort, wherever we were moved, to make sure that all POWs knew it, and took great risks sometimes to do that. But we knew it was worth it.
Could you share with our listeners a little bit about how you came to learn about the tap code?
When I went through your training at at Stead Air Force Base in Reno, Nevada, a sergeant was teaching a communications class, and his name was Claude Watkins. He mentioned that in World War II, American POWs held in German POW camp were able to tap on a common water pipe and communicate between different buildings. As it would happen, I asked him as we left class how they sent the dashes, thinking it was Morse code. He said, no, I probably should have explained that. It was not Morse code, it was tap code. And he pulled me up to the chalkboard and drew it out for me, and that's how I learned it. Quite by chance.
How vital or important was it to communicate while in captivity?
Well, that's kind of a long story because it was absolutely essential for us. The first thing we did was tap to each other, get names and any information that we could get from later shoot downs. But quickly, we tried to find out who was the senior ranking of the group in our communication network, no matter how big it was or wherever we were, because that made us comfortable to have a senior ranking officer make decisions. For instance, we would discuss among ourselves in that Heartbreak Hotel, we called it, different responses we should try to make with the North Vietnamese during the interrogations. And the SRO would decide on one so we would be consistent. And also, our communication, they were trying to really create doubt about our relationship with other POWs. Our interrogators would tell us that Lockhart or Shoemaker or one of them had told them all about their aircraft capabilities and targets, and you might as well too, and tried to use us against each other, but they were unable to because we were communicating all the time about what we were being interrogated about, how we resisted, and what we thought, and the SRO would get in on that too, of how we should resist. And it just boiled down, do not give them anything of value until they torture you so much that you can take no more and still retain your sanity and will. And so that was our guidance. And so we did it time after time. And it created a peer pressure among all of us. When somebody came back and communicated what he had gone through, we made up our minds that we were going to do just as much if we could, or more if we could. And it created a unity and an esprit, a pride in our whatever group we were in, because we were actively opposing the enemy and doing our best to deny any opportunity of being exploited by making propaganda statements or giving them any kind of operational information of value. And we were very successful. We told lies. We made up things. We talked among ourselves what we were going to tell him and no more. And sometimes in an interrogation, they wanted to know something about maybe our organization or how our airplanes were organized in a raid and so on. And we would sit there and listen and talk to them a little bit, giving no information, but we were at the same time trying to egg the interrogator to give his opinion of what the answer should be. And pretty soon he would give some answer that was way off base, but we would agree with him. So, and he really thought that was good information. And we had all kinds of ways of just not cooperating with him in any way. And I think that is the one thing that we've followed the code of conduct to the best of our ability. Sometimes we were tortured to a point where we had to do something different. But when we did, we usually went to a second level of resistance. And when they wanted us to write a propaganda statement that the North Vietnamese communist government was so great and our government was so bad and we were criminal air pirates, they wanted us to write that. Well, the English language is so rich. We could put in double meanings, all kinds of things that if those statements had ever been read to intelligent people, they would recognize immediately that they were forced statements. As a matter of fact, the North Vietnamese made almost no effort to use any of the propaganda statements they forced us to write, because at the highest levels of intelligence and government, they recognized it would be counterproductive if those were released.
Thank you for listening to Part 1. Please tune into Part 2, where we further explore Colonel Harris's POW experience, eventual release after 8 years of confinement, and his personal insights on resiliency and leadership. It's an episode you won't want to miss.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Air Force Judge Advocate General's Reporter Podcast. You can find this episode, transcription, and show note, along with others, at reporter.dodlive.mil. We welcome your feedback. Please subscribe to our show on iTunes or Stitcher and leave a review. This helps us grow, innovate, and develop an even better JAG Corps. Until next time,
nothing from this show or any others should be construed as legal advice. Please consult an attorney for any legal issue. Nothing from this show is endorsed by the federal government, Air Force,
or any of its components.
All content and opinions are those of our guest and host. Thank you.